The pound is in a nosedive, shops are boarded up, and whispers of a lost decade are swirling around the teacups. Is Britain's once mighty economy truly collapsing? In May 2010, David Cameron entered 10 Downing Street as the newly elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, but his victory was far from absolute. The Conservative Party secured only 306 seats, falling short of a majority. This led to an unusual coalition with Nick Clegg's Liberal Democrats, a rare political arrangement in the UK since World War II. Cameron presented himself as a modern conservative, supporting tax cuts, privatisations, and welfare reductions while advocating for social liberal causes like equal marriage and environmental sustainability. However, at the core of his agenda was the controversial Big Society initiative. This aimed to shrink government involvement, empowering communities and charities to take on roles traditionally handled by the state. The UK was still reeling from the 2008 financial crisis, with a national budget deficit of £115 million. Cameron and his Chancellor George Osborne were determined to slash this deficit rapidly through austerity measures. These cuts were extensive and deeply impactful. Welfare support was tightened, making it harder for disabled and sick individuals to receive aid. Education funding faced significant reductions, with school and college budgets cut by 13% and university funding slashed by 40%. This burden was shifted onto students through higher tuition fees. Public sector workers endured a 2-year pay freeze followed by minimal raises. Key services like police, defence and public transport saw their budgets significantly reduced. Even the Royal Mail was sold off at a bargain price. By 2015, the deficit had decreased by more than a third, but the social and economic repercussions were profound. Austerity measures hit the poorest hardest. Despite Cameron's claim that we're all in this together, the reality was starkly different. While corporation tax dropped from 28% to 20%, benefiting businesses, ordinary people faced job insecurity and diminished support. Food banks, once rare, became essential for many, distributing over 1 million packages by 2015. The fallout from these policies led to widespread protests and strikes, reflecting the public's growing discontent. Despite the backlash, the Conservatives unexpectedly won the 2015 election, gaining seats and securing a majority. This win, attributed by some to the shy Tory effect, bolstered Cameron's confidence. However, the long-term effects of his austerity measures were just beginning to take their toll on the nation, setting the stage for the economic challenges Britain faces today. To understand the next chapter in Britain's economic saga, we must revisit the emergence of a new threat: Brexit. In the years leading up to the 2015 general election, a significant political shift began to take shape. Pollsters noticed a steady increase in support for the UK Independence Party, or UKIP, a right-wing political group led by Nigel Farage. While UKIP had various policies, their main goal was clear. They wanted the UK to leave the European Union. Support for the EU had always fluctuated in the UK, especially concerning immigration. EU rules allow citizens of any member state to move and work freely in other member states. Since the early 2000s, net immigration from the EU to the UK had been on the rise. Research indicated that this migration positively impacted the UK economy. However, during times of economic hardship, immigrants often became scapegoats for broader issues. Prime Minister David Cameron, like many, played into these fears, promising to reduce net migration to the tens of thousands. Despite these promises, support for UKIP continued to grow, and in 2014, one of Cameron's MPs defected to UKIP in protest of his perceived inaction on immigration. To prevent further loss of support, Cameron decided to co-opt UKIP's key policy. He promised a referendum on EU membership.
Will reject the European Union. That is why I am in favour of having a referendum.
Cameron was confident that the Remain side would win, believing that the desire to leave the EU was a fringe obsession. However, his assumption proved disastrous. Shortly after announcing the referendum, he received a message from Boris Johnson, who declared his support for the Leave campaign. Johnson's charismatic and populist approach quickly made him the de facto leader of the Leave campaign. The Leave campaign framed their message around the idea of taking back control, which resonated deeply with many voters. This slogan tapped into concerns about immigration, national sovereignty, and public services. It allowed voters to project their frustrations onto the EU regardless of the actual causes of their issues. In contrast, the Remain campaign struggled to present a compelling, emotional narrative about the benefits of EU membership, which appeared bureaucratic and distant. On June 24, 2016, the BBC announced that Britain had voted to leave the EU.
The British people have voted to leave the European Union, and their will must be respected.
This result set off a chain reaction of political upheaval, starting with Cameron's resignation. The assumption was that Boris Johnson would take over as Prime Minister, but he surprisingly withdrew from the leadership race. Instead, Theresa May emerged as the new leader. May's tenure was marked by attempts to negotiate Brexit while navigating a deeply divided parliament. Her campaign slogan, "Brexit means Brexit," did little to clarify the path forward. The referendum had polarised opinions, making it nearly impossible to find a compromise. Some wanted a complete break from the EU, while others sought to retain close economic ties. May called another election in hopes of securing a stronger mandate. However, the election backfired, leaving her with a reduced majority and forcing her into an uneasy alliance with the Democratic Unionist Party. Her Brexit deal, which included provisions to avoid a hard border in Ireland, failed to gain parliamentary approval multiple times. After May's resignation, Boris Johnson finally became Prime Minister. Johnson adopted a more aggressive approach, showing less concern about a no-deal Brexit and suspending Parliament to limit opposition. His campaign to get Brexit done resonated with a weary public, leading to a decisive electoral victory. Johnson's subsequent renegotiation of May's deal marked the UK's official exit from the EU, but the long-term economic consequences were only beginning to unfold. The stage was set for the profound impacts of Brexit on Britain's economy. In early 2020, as Britain grappled with the fallout from Brexit, a new challenge loomed on the horizon: COVID-19. The first cases of COVID-19 in Britain were documented on January 30th, 2020, marking the beginning of a crisis that would reshape the nation's economy and daily life. At first, the UK government's response was gradual, advising hand-washing, banning large gatherings, and imposing quarantine measures for travellers from high-risk countries. However, the virus spread rapidly, and by March 23rd, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced a nationwide lockdown.
And save more lives. And that's why we've been asking people to stay at home during this pandemic.
Johnson, initially skeptical of such drastic measures due to their potential economic impact, had no choice as COVID-19 cases and deaths rose exponentially. The lockdown was unprecedented, effectively shutting down much of the economy. Millions of people were confined to their homes, businesses were forced to close, and the National Health Service (NHS) faced an overwhelming demand for resources like masks and aprons. Amid this turmoil, reports surfaced that some government officials leveraged the crisis to benefit their allies financially, awarding lucrative contracts without the standard anti-corruption safeguards. The pandemic's economic fallout was severe. The UK economy contracted by 9.9% in 2020, the worst annual performance in over 300 years. Unemployment surged and many businesses, particularly in the hospitality and retail sectors, struggled to survive. To mitigate the damage, Chancellor Rishi Sunak introduced various financial support measures, including the furlough scheme, which subsidised wages for millions of workers. One of Sunak's most controversial initiatives was the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which launched in August 2020. Designed to boost the hospitality sector, the government subsidised meals at restaurants. While the scheme was popular, leading to the consumption of 160 million state-subsidised meals, it also contributed to a resurgence of COVID-19 cases, undermining the progress made during the initial lockdown. Throughout 2020 and 2021, the UK experienced multiple lockdowns as the government oscillated between reopening the economy and imposing restrictions to control the virus. The political landscape was also turbulent, with scandals such as Johnson's breach of lockdown rules and the revelation of government officials attending gatherings in violation of COVID-19 restrictions, leading to significant public outrage and political instability. Despite these challenges, the rapid development and rollout of COVID-19 vaccines offered a glimmer of hope. By mid-2021, the UK had one of the highest vaccination rates globally, which helped to stabilise the situation temporarily. However, the economic scars of the pandemic were deep, and the path to recovery was fraught with obstacles.
The Bank of England warned today that the economy is once more shrinking sharply and won't get back up to its pre-COVID level until the start of 2022.
In September 2022, Prime Minister Liz Truss introduced a series of radical economic policies, including the substantial tax cuts primarily benefiting the wealthy. These measures were financed through increased government borrowing, which spooked financial markets. The pound's value plummeted and mortgage interest rates soared, exacerbating the economic crisis. Truss's tenure was short-lived, lasting only 49 days, making her the shortest-serving Prime Minister in UK history. Her resignation paved the way for Rishi Sunak to assume the role of Prime Minister in October 2022. Sunak faced the monumental task of steering the country through the economic turbulence while addressing the long-term impacts of Brexit and the pandemic. By 2023, Sunak made several promises aimed at economic recovery, but progress was slow. The cost of living crisis, driven by rising energy prices and inflation, continued to strain households. Public services, already weakened by a decade of austerity, struggled to cope with increased demand. Britain's economy, battered by Brexit, profound economic and social challenges. As the country looked ahead, the need for resilient and effective leadership became more critical than ever. Let's dive into the current political landscape and its impact on the UK's economic woes. For nearly a century, the UK has largely operated under a one-party system, with the Conservative Party holding power for over 70 of the past 100 years. Now, the Conservatives are poised for a major defeat in the next election, potentially signalling a significant shift. Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, is expected to take over as Prime Minister. Starmer has been vocal about his opposition to the policies of previous Conservative leaders like Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, particularly criticising their handling of the economy. However, despite his critiques, Starmer has moved away from his earlier stance on rejoining the EU and appears committed to continuing some of the Conservatives' austerity measures. His approach echoes that of former Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron, focusing on fiscal restraint and maintaining many of the welfare cuts introduced by his predecessors. One major concern is Starmer's less ambitious stance on climate change and potential further privatisation of the NHS. This cautious approach might hinder the significant investment needed to revive the UK's infrastructure and public services after years of austerity and mismanagement. As the UK grapples with economic recovery, Starmer's ability to enact meaningful change quickly will be crucial in determining whether his party's support endures. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative and thought-provoking, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to stay connected with more in-depth analyses. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the state of the UK's economy and politics. Share your comments below. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.